Em, la historia de el Arca de Noé, literal o simbólica, la Torre de Babel, literal o simbólica, me ahorcan si no hago esta pregunta.
See, the real elephant in the room here is the flood story. It's not Adam and Eve, it's the flood, because it is scientifically indefensible to think that within the span of human history that all of the world's terrestrial life was wiped out in a flood, except for that aboard the ark. That is indefensible scientifically, historically, and linguistically. And therefore, so many people try to interpret the flood story as being a description of a local flood. It was just a flood that, say, flooded the Persian Gulf basin or some other local area. But honestly, as I read the flood story, it's very clear that what is described there is a worldwide flood where all of mankind and everything that breathes on earth is wiped out in this flood, except for those aboard the ark. The mountains are covered by the water. The flood story returns the earth to the primordial condition that was described in Genesis 1, verses 2 and following, where you remember the earth was without form and void, and darkness was upon the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And then it describes how God commanded the waters to recede and the mountains began to appear. And you have this whole pattern repeated in the flood story. And it's a kind of like a recreation of the world. And so this is, I think, clearly describing a worldwide flood, not a local flood, as uncomfortable as that might make us. And this is one of the narratives that bears resemblance to flood narratives in the ancient world. In Mesopotamia, for example, the Atrahasis epic describes such a worldwide flood. And they have a kind of figure, Utnapishtim, who is the counterpart of Noah in the biblical flood story. And it's a matter of tremendous debate among Old Testament scholars as to what the relationship is between the Jewish flood story and this Sumerian, Mesopotamian flood story. So this is one of the most, I think, compelling cases where we can say that this is mytho-history. There was probably a flood. It was probably local, but it is described in the figurative language of myth as a universal flood that wiped everything out except for those aboard the ark. And I'll tell you, you talk about the spiritual benefits of this. This has helped me tremendously. When I used to hear about Noah and the ark, my blood would run cold because I knew this couldn't be literally true. I once, when we had our little babies, had a diaper changing pad that featured Noah's Ark on the picture, and it had happy blue and pink hippos cavorting in front of the ark, and elephants and giraffes poking their heads out the windows. It was so cute, this cartoon of Noah's Ark. And I would look at that and I would think to myself, is that what we as biblical Christians are committed to? Is that what we think? How can you defend the truth of Christianity if that's what we have to believe? And this understanding now of the flood narrative as mytho-history has so liberated me that now I love the flood story. And I've got a picture, a card of Noah's Ark and the animals in my bathroom where I look at it. And now it fills me with warm feelings rather than raising their hair on my neck. So I do think the flood story is probably the premier example of mythohistory in Genesis 1 to 11.